Welcome to Indian Military Heritage Festival 2023. I'm your host, Preeti Hoon. We're about to begin with the first session for the day. It's on war stories. Step back in time and immerse yourself in history at the Military Heritage Festival, where war stories are now coming to life. Joining us with me are the panelists, Major General Ian Cardozo, AVSM SM retired. Sir, can I have you on stage, please? And moderating the session will be Ambassador Asoke Mukerji, IFS retired. Can I please request both the gentlemen, sirs, can we please stand for a picture for that so that we can give you a nice memento after you finish your session? Thank you very much.
I don't know whether I've done the right thing. We are starting late everywhere. So I told the person who was handling this, Rakesh, we'll start on time. Even if there is one person, let's start on time, at least to get the right habit going. So, but there's hardly anybody here. Doesn't matter. Okay. Huh? 10 people. Okay, good. The reason why there's so few of us here is because the other session started late and they're still there. They said they'd come here, but they haven't come because they're attending a session which has started late. Or considering the subject, do any of you want to say anything? We can spend a little time which we would have spent at the end in the beginning. So if anybody has any questions about these books, you can ask them now. Anyone? Or is it inappropriate? People are coming in. I think we'll wait a few minutes. People are just joining in. Come in, please. The first casualty in war is truth. Truth. That's right. In a way, what was said yesterday, that everyone, like the blind man and the elephant, the blind man and the elephant. Some say he's like a trunk. Somebody says he's got like a big ear. Like that, people who take part in war and in battle have different perceptions of what actually happened. The company commander has his own view. The battalion commander has his own perspective. The brigade commander. Yesterday we were talking about Siachen. And I've written about Siachen, and I base my story on the capture of Bana Top on the story told by the Paramveer Chakra himself. But yesterday, General Ramesh Kulkarni, who was the general officer commanding in that 28th division, he has a different story to tell. Also, in every army, in every war, in every battle, a certain amount of exaggeration does take place because history is written by the victors. And the victor likes to take credit for things which he may have done or may have not done, but he likes to take the credit for himself. So as I was saying, the question is very, very meaningful. Yes, the first casualty in war is truth. So I don't know what we can do about it, but I think we need, in answer to your question, that before somebody writes about a story, he should take everybody's story. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. Put the pieces together. Remove all the exaggerations, because people will say what is right. You can have a definite answer to what the actual truth is. But it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. Yes. You're very right. we draw the wrong lessons. Now, yesterday I was attending a session which consisted of the war in the Siachen Glacier, which is it's the Indian Army is the only army in the world which is fighting even today in glaciated territory, which is from 18 to 20,000 feet. In winter, the temperatures are minus 60 degrees Celsius. There's no air. The air is so rarefied you can't breathe. Now, that is one, Siachen. The other is Sri Lanka. And the third is Kargil. Now, unfortunately, all of us paper over what really happens. Now, I believe there's unnecessary government interference and restrictions placed on the army which should not be there. You take Kargil. Why was the Indian army told you will not cross the line of control? All operations, even defensive operations, have an element of offense, offensive defense. And if we cannot cross the line of control, then our hands are tied behind our back. If the enemy attacks you in one place, there's no point in attacking at the same place because he's prepared to attack somewhere else. But when you're told you can't cross the line of control, what is this? It's rubbish. And the enemy is watching you. They're looking at the leadership. They're looking at political leadership. They're looking at higher command, leadership of high orders. And if you don't show you're only going to react, then they have a clear map as to what they should do. They know that we will not react. They'll know that the government is holding us back. Why? Why are they doing this? Take Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, it is a cobweb of, it was a mess. You had the army chief interfering, army vice chief interfering, army commander interfering, RAW interfering, intelligence interfering. What does the commander on the spot do? Whom does he listen to? When I was commanding a division, I got orders from the Corps that you will not use mortars, you will not use RCL guns unless you get permission from the Corps headquarters. I knew that if I obeyed that order, it would be too late to react. So I told my battalion commanders, listen, this is what the orders from the Corps are. I'm sorry. Please, I am delegating this responsibility to you. You please make sure you don't let me down. Don't use excessive force when it is not required. Now, I was flying in a chopper over the line of control. Now, you know, the line of control is not marked on the map, on the ground. So, a chopper can go this way, that's it, over the line of control. The Pakistanis opened up to shoot the chopper down. The battalion commander used his RCL gun, blew up a Pakistani bunker, and 6 Pakistanis died. I was asked, why did you use an RCL gun when the orders from the Corps are you will not use it? So I told the Corps commander, I said, sir, would you prefer a destroyed chopper and a GOC who is killed, or 6 Pakistanis who have fired at a chopper? So we need to be a little more, I don't say, see, in the Indian Army and India as a country has no aspirations to take over somebody else's country or land which doesn't belong to us. But we need to ensure that what we have, at least that is secure. And for that, offensive operations are required. Offensive defense is required. But will the government or the civil political leadership understand that? But if you don't speak, then they will never hear. They will continue interfering in our operations. They should lay off. I hope I've answered your question, sir.
Well, then I think more questions that you want to see.
Yeah.
Politicians, the political authority says 48 or 40 Muzaffar or to start. they say you can't use the airport. On 71 states, you can't go to Dhaka. In Pop Power, they say the orders are delightfully vague, as you mentioned. In Kargil, they say you will not go across the NSP. That is a political sagacity. Which the historians, they say, for the politicians, it was wrong. That's the politician versus decide as to what the military, how the military decides. It is not the military decide that I'll go and capture Islamabad or go and capture Karachi. It's not a job. It's the politician who decides. Decide the political hierarchy is the peacetime, the fusion has not taken place in the military as such political hierarchy or what is the job intention, sir, as you are saying.
The lower commanders have the authority to take authority on their hand, which may or may not flow from the political authority, may be counterproductive, sir.
The questioner is a very senior officer of the Indian Army. Really. He is also been the Adjutant General. He's commanded a corps, a very seasoned officer. But you are very correct. I'm to answer your question, I'm going to ask you another question. I don't know whether it's the right thing to do, but I think it is right because if you put country first, then there should be no holds barred. I'm asking you, does India have a vision? Does India have a vision? That means, where will India be politically, militarily, economically, socially, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the line? If the government had a vision, then the Army, Navy and Air Force and industry and agriculture and health and education, everyone would draw and make their own vision. So we will be very clear about what we have to do and what we do not have to do. And in that vision, what you are saying, when the politician says this, that and the other, we need to say, sorry, this is not in the interest of the country. How about doing it this way or that way? And then once the vision is clear, then people have the initiative and the confidence to do what is right, irrespective of the consequences. Now, what I said, what I did as a Div Commander, it is wrong. I have not spoken about this elsewhere because I can't set a wrong example, because I'm disobeying my superiors. But the point is, at that time, I took a decision. My head was on the block. I could have been sacked. One has to decide who comes first, country or self. Because I'm dispensable, but the honor of India is not dispensable. So we need to speak at one time or another, better before than after. And therefore I'm talking about vision.
Well, General, I think you've set the tone for our conversation today, because now
No, I've set the cat amongst the pigeons.
you have set the tone, and I really wanted to welcome everybody. This is one of those sessions which is earmarked for one of the legends of our armed forces, General Cardozo. You have, of course, the books, his autobiography, which came out recently, Cartoos, Saab, on which I will ask him a couple of questions. 1971 short stories, stories of the war of 1971, which came out when the COVID crisis was on. Then more recently, Beyond Fear, a collection of 13 stories, which again have been very, very popular and well received by the audience. And of course, there's a collection of poems. And I think that that's a very unusual compendium to these books, a collection of poems called The Marigold. So I think, General, if you allow me, let me start with Cartoos, Saab, your autobiography. I read it with, for me, coming from a background in diplomatic practice and history, it was one book which gave me an overview of the evolution of independent India, if I may say so. The milestones in our military history which meshed in with our diplomatic history. And in that sense, that book was an eye-opener, because there were things which you've written about which made me think. But I wanted to ask you, what made you write this book, which is your autobiography, and what is the significance of the title, Cartoos Saab? What is the reason why you chose that as the title?
Thank you. Uh, I can't speak for myself, except that I left St. Xavier's College after 1 year, and the principal was very upset with me, and he said, "You denied somebody else from coming here." But I left college and joined the National Defense Academy at Khadakwasla for the simple reason I was looking for a life of adventure. And I think what happened was I didn't have to look for adventure. Adventure came looking for me. And all of us cadets, I think we've all had very adventurous lives. I've seen 3 wars. I've seen insurgencies in J&K, in East, in Northeast. So I was asked to write my autobiography about 15 to 20 years ago by the head of Roli Books. But I said, see, the Indian Army, as far as the Indian Army is concerned, we have been told, don't blow your own trumpet, don't beat your own drum. So I refused. But a series of incidents took place later on, and I felt that the citizens of India don't know much or anything about the Indian Army, of how we live in peace and how we fight and do our duty in war, and if necessary, put our lives in the line of fire. And 2 incidents took place which confirmed this to me. One is, I cut a long story short, I had already lost a leg, and then a young boy was drowning at Kovalam and shouting for help, and there was nobody competent enough to rescue him. I had to take off my leg, and I rescued him. And there was a whole lot of journalists there who wanted a story, and I said, there's no story to tell. Later on, I realized that if the story was told, the Indian Army would have benefited, people with disability would have benefited, and I probably did the wrong thing. Later on, I wonder if you know about Kushwant Singh, the great editor, fearless editor. You must have heard about him. He wanted to write my story, and I said no. And he said, I will write your story whether you like it or not, and if there are any mistakes, you are to blame. So I said, okay. And he wrote the story, and it had a very funny heading. Believe it or not, we have a one-legged gone Gorkha general. So and there was a lot of mistakes. So I decided that I think it's better I tell my story, but I tell my story in a way which projects the Indian Army as a whole rather than myself. I'm there somewhere, but it is the story of the Indian Army. So that is why I wrote this book. And the title Cartoos Saab is because I belong to the Gurkhas, the 5th Gurkha Rifles Frontier Force. And the Gurkhas found it difficult to pronounce Cardozo. They used to call me Katot Saab, Cartoos Saab, this Saab, that Saab. So they finally, Cartoos Saab stuck. And I thought it would be a good title for my book.
General, that's interesting because in your books and in your short stories as well, you have affinity for the Gurkha as a soldier, and you have gone yourself, you've described it in your book, how you've gone to their villages from where they are recruited and got to know their systems, the way they live and what their aspirations are. Would you like to share with us something about the Gurkha ethos?
Yeah. See, the Gurkhas, as the Brits also know, are fearless fighters. They are most gentle with old people, with children, but in war, they are fearless. So when I was a young officer and I asked for leave was sanctioned, and I said, they asked me, where would you want to go? I said, I'm going to Bombay, because that's where my parents are. They said, leave is sanctioned, but you're not going to Bombay, you're going to Nepal. And so they said, this young rifleman is going on leave. He will take you to his house. You stay there for 3 days. And after that, he will hand you over to the next person and the next person. And I spent 2 months with the families of my men. I learned the language, I learned the dialects, I learned the history of my battalion and the regiment from people who had fought in Africa, in Italy, in Burma, all over the world, in Flanders, France, etc. So my regimental history came alive. I learned their songs, I learned their dances, I learned the difficulties they face in Nepal. And I got totally wedded to the Gurkha system, to the Gurkhas as a race, and my men. When I went back to my company, my men said, they would die for me, and I would die for them. So that is what the Gurkhas are all about. And I have a special chapter on Nepal and the Gurkhas in the book, which tells you about the resilience, the fortitude, the courage, the bravery, the commitment of the Gurkha soldier, which is well known worldwide. And there are problems today, unfortunately, but that's why I wrote about the Gurkhas in the book.
Thank you. Thank you. It comes across to the reader, the empathy that you have for the Gurkhas and for the troops with you who are from the Gurkha community. And the other thing that comes, I remember this vivid description of when you landed in Sylhet in 1971 and the troops carried you on their shoulder as you got off the helicopter. But could you tell us a little about how you were the first war-disabled officer of the Indian Army to eventually go on to command a battalion and brigade in operational areas at a time when the policy was not in favor of such making such appointments? How did that happen?
Ever since World War II, only the Army headquarter policy was at that time that no disabled officer would be able to command troops either in peace or in field. That was the policy at that time. And only 2 officers had reached the rank of brigadier, that too on the staff, in all these 30, 40 years. That was a deplorable situation. And I just explained to you how much I owed to the Gurkhas, how much I loved them, how much I was wanting to go back with all my mind and heart, because that's why I joined the army. And now I was being told, sorry, you can't go back to your unit. You'll be a Babu in uniform. Babu means the staff. You'll be working on the staff. That wasn't what I wanted. I didn't know what I ought to do to change the policy. I was only a major, and Army headquarters is a huge institution. How could a major challenge the Army headquarters? But while I was in a hospital bed, I read a book called Reach for the Sky. It is a book about Douglas Bader. Douglas Bader was a RAF pilot who lost both his legs in a car accident. But at that time, Britain was facing the Germans, and they had a problem with enough people to come, and so they allowed Douglas Bader to fly. So when the Air Force Air Chief came to visit his squadron, Douglas Bader took a Spitfire, he went into the air, and he was doing aerobatics over the airfield. So the Air Chief said, "Who is that madman?" Douglas Bader. What is he trying to prove? That he can fly. He said, "I can see that. It's okay." So Douglas Bader went on to become an air ace. He shot down 21 German fighters. He became an air ace. And then he was shot down himself over Germany. And so both his legs got caught in the cockpit. He landed on his stumps. He got injured. And the Germans were ecstatic. They said, "We have caught Douglas Bader. We have him as a prisoner of war." And they asked Douglas Bader, "What do you want?" He said, "I have a spare pair of legs in UK. Can you fly them over?" So they agreed. An airplane came and flew his legs. They were dropped down by parachute. And they gave Douglas Bader his legs. What did he do? He escaped. He escaped, but it was winter. And it was snowing. How far could he get with 2 artificial legs. So they captured him, they brought him back to the hospital, they put him on the first floor, and they took away his legs. What did Douglas Bader do? At night, he crawled from bed to bed, he pulled off the bed sheets, made a rope, tied it to one of the beds, took it out of the window, and escaped for the second time without his legs. Again, how far could he go? He was crawling in the snow, he was caught and sent to Cold Death, which is a high security prison. What I'm trying to tell you is that he did what he loved what he did, he was not afraid, and he never gave up. And that told me, you need to take Douglas Bader as your example and prove to the Indian Army that you are as good as anybody else with 2 legs. It took me 7 years to fight the system. I used to do 6 to 7 miles running every day. I ran so much that metal fatigue broke the bolt which connected my foot to the leg. I got another leg. I had a reserve leg. I swam. And then I was posted. I think luck also had played a great part in this. I was posted to military operations, and the director of military operations asked me, which battalion have you commanded? So I said, I haven't commanded the battalion, sir. So he said, why? I said, because the policy of Army Headquarters says I can't command a battalion. He said, but do you want to command a battalion? I said, yes, sir. Apply. So I applied, and the application went to the vice chief. And the vice chief said, okay, I'm going to visit Jammu and Kashmir, send him along with me. So, as a staff officer. So I went along with him to J&K. He was going in a chopper from post to post, and I was taking the vehicles down below. At the last post, it was 3 in the morning, and I was told a friend of mine is commanding this post. So I climbed up. It's about 2,800 feet. And the vice chief landed in a chopper, and he said, how have you come here? He thought perhaps because my NDA connections, Army, Navy, Air Force, I got a chopper and I came up there. How have you come here? I said, sir, I climbed. He said, you can climb? I said, sir, unfortunately, my senior officers don't know what I can do and what I can't do. He said, what do you mean? I said, sir, Army Headquarters has not given me the opportunity, or others like me, to prove what we can do. So he said, don't be impertinent. Sorry, sir. He went back. He thought about it. He went and spoke to the chief. The chief himself had lost an eye in World War II, General Reiner. So General Reiner said, is it so? I'm going to Ladakh. Send him along with me. So I went to Ladakh, clambered over snow, ice, rocks, etc. And when we came back, he sent for my file and he said, yes, give him a battalion and other war-disabled officers who are not taking shelter of their wounds. So that's how I got a battalion. Yeah, but after that, I got approved for promotion to the rank of a brigadier. And the MS person who was in charge of personnel, he was my company commander in the 5th Gorkhas. So he rang me up and said, Ian, congratulations, you've been approved for rank of brigadier. I said, thank you, sir. Which brigade are you going to give me? He said, you can't command a brigade. I said, why? He said, there's no precedent. I said, sir, if I can command a battalion and physical fitness, if I can display at lower ranks, why can't I command a brigade? He said, there's no precedent, you can't command a brigade. So I immediately dashed off a letter to the chief. Again, lucky, the chief happened to be my div commander when I was in operations in 1971. And he said, if he can command a battalion in an operational area, why can't he command a brigade? Why are you troubling this man? When is the brigade going to fall vacant? Promote him in the brigade. So in those days, I don't know whether now, but in those days, the chiefs didn't have to run to the bureaucrats and the politicians. They did what they wanted to do if they felt it was right. And then it opened up promotion for all officers of the disabled officers of the Indian Army. And 3 officers were promoted to Army Commander, which is 1 rank below the chief. And one of them had lost both legs. And we are waiting for the day and a disabled officer will be promoted as Chief of the Army Staff.
Well, thank you for sharing that, General. I think that's a very uplifting message, and from based on your own experience. Is there a message in your book for the youth of our country? Have you thought of them as an audience who'd read your book and be inspired by what you've done?
I think I've already, the message is already there. There are young people who have got 89, 90%, 95%, 99% in all their, but do they pick up a profession that they love? Or they are forced to do something they don't want to do? So the same message prevails. Do what you love. After you do what you love and you've got the profession you want, then love what you do. What is the meaning of love what you do? It means that you must be the best in that profession. You don't have to compete with others. You compete with yourself. Raise the bar of your own competence so that nobody can tell you anything about what you ought to know and don't know. You have to be the best. So do what you love what you do, never be afraid. There'll be lots of challenges, never be afraid. And lastly, never give up. That's my message. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's a message which a lot of youth in our country would take and work on. I mentioned when introducing you that you are unusual in being what we would call a warrior poet or a war poet. You have a book of poems which you've published called The Marigold. And could I ask you why you titled the collection The Marigold? Yeah. And could I also ask you why your collection of poems is now on Spotify and YouTube and Apple Music? I mean, this is something very unusual. So would you like to say anything about it?
I was influenced to some degree by the war poets of World War I, Rupert Brooke, David Sassoon, and many others, and Sarojini Naidu, who wrote about war and battles and soldiers. And I found that poetry, I'm not a poet by any chance. I write verse in the sense I write poems because I feel it has a certain amount of emotion, which is not there so much in prose. It can be, but poetry is a different medium which attracts a different type of audience. And I thought that there's nobody who's written poetry about poems on war in India, in the Indian system. So I think I should do so. And that's what I did. But this little book of poems has been published in a hurry. I need to do a better job of it. But there was no publisher who was prepared to publish poetry. So it is a self-published book. It's got just 10 poems, and I want to do a better job of it with 20 poems and find a publisher. But I think that more people should write, not only in prose, but also in poetry. If they love India, if they love their country, if they love the people of India, then we need to do our bit to make what happens in the Indian Army in peace and in field known to the public. And that's why I wrote this little book of poems. And the title is The Marigold because every country in the world has their own flower of remembrance for their war dead. The Commonwealth countries have the poppy. The French have their own flower. USA has their own flower. Russians have their own flower. What about India? We've been free for the last 75 years. We fought 5 wars. Shouldn't we have our own flower for remembrance? The poppy is not an Indian flower. It's grown in Afghanistan to make opium. But we have the marigold, which is used from birth to death. It's used in every possible event. It graces every endeavor. So why can't we have our own flower of remembrance, which is the marigold? I've been campaigning for the marigold for the last so many years, but I'm afraid I have not met with much success. Uh, let's see. I hope if you support me, maybe we'll be able to make it work.
Thank you. And I must say that your poem, one of your poems has a refrain, if I remember it right, asking for a national war memorial to remember the people who have died. And now we have a national war memorial. So in a sense, you, by writing that years before we had the national war memorial.
Yeah, I don't know whether my poetry, my poems, had anything to do with it, but it. I would like to share with you that in India Gate has now the National War Memorial, and there is a chhatri, a canopy, and the canopy had a statue of George V, which was removed about 10 or 15 years ago. So it was empty. And I was wanting to honor the unknown soldier. Now, the point is this. We've got 21 Paramveer Chakras. We've got many Mahavir Chakras. That is the equivalent of the Victoria Cross, the Distinguished Service Order, the Military Medal, the Military Cross, etc. But there are many, many soldiers who have done unimaginable jobs in missions impossible. But there's nobody to write their story. There's no citation. So in England, you have the unknown soldier on the floor of Westminster Abbey. On the floor of Westminster, there are many tombs of princes and kings and queens and very famous people, and you can walk over those tombstones. But you cannot walk over the grave of the unknown soldier, because every day fresh flowers are put around its border, and there's a soldier there who makes sure that nobody walks over that grave. So Britain honors the unknown soldier in this manner. In the USA, similarly, 24/7, whether it's snowing or rain or sun or whatever, there's a guard of honor going up and down honoring the unknown soldier. And there it's an inscription, I don't know the exact inscription, but it says, "Here lies the unknown soldier, known only to God." Something like that. In Italy, in all countries, even in Bangladesh, there is a monument to the unknown soldier. So why couldn't we have one ourselves? And the most appropriate place would have been that canopy. But the government decided otherwise, and they put somebody else there. No names.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to your two collections of short stories. 1971. Now, your battalion played an outstanding role in the 1971 war. Could you tell the audience about what happened in the course of that?
As I was talking about the Gurkha soldier, and I told you that the Gurkha soldier is unimaginably courageous and brave and heroic. So I was still in staff college when the war broke out, and my battalion was charged with capturing a feature called Atgram. Now the battalion had come out from counter-insurgency area, and we believe that since it is our own people, there's no question of using artillery. So there was no artillery in that division. So we had no artillery to support our attack. So the CO decided to launch a midnight attack, a surprise attack, using the Gurkha weapon of the kukri. And that night, to cut a long story short, we caught the enemy by surprise. It was a dark night. Only after we hit the enemy defenses and the sentry said, "Tham kon ja raha hai?" Halt, who goes there? That we launched our attack with the Gurkha war cry, "Ayo Gorkhali," and we fell upon the enemy, used our kukris, and decapitated 32 Pakistani soldiers. When that happened, those who survived told their compatriots, "Don't mess with the Gurkhas, you're likely to lose your head." So after that, now in war, when you do well, you get a more difficult task, and you get a more difficult task. So the next task, we were tasked to capture a place called Ghazipur, where another battalion had failed to capture. And we captured Ghazipur. By this time, the 2IC had been killed, and I was now posted from Staff College to replace the second in command. So by this time, we had started the war, entered the war with 18 officers. By the second attack, we had lost 3 officers killed, 7 officers wounded. So now there were only 11 officers in the battalion. And the CO was trying to reorganize the battalion, the companies with the soldiers and the officers, etc. Now we had a very, very famous corps commander, one of the best strategists that India has ever produced. His name was General Sagat Singh. General Sagat was an impatient man. He wanted to be the first in Dhaka. And he got news which was incorrect, that the brigade which is holding Sylhet, 202 Pakistani brigade, infantry brigade, had moved for the defense of Dhaka. So he said, I want Dhaka to be captured, and the only way it can be done is by heliborne operation, and I want the Gurkhas to go. So the CO said, sir, have a heart, give me a chance to reorganize. He says, no, there's no time. Move immediately. Now, in war, there is orders are orders. There's only this much you can do. So we went in, cut a long story short, and we fought. Now, we were told, now, no battalion or unit which has been para-dropped or heli-lifted, come in, ladies, please come this place in front. So the teaching is that a unit which is being para-dropped or heli-landed behind enemy lines, and we were 100 kilometers inside Pakistani territory, you have to be reinforced, otherwise that force will disintegrate due to casualties, due to lack of ammunition, lack of food, lack of water, lack of evacuation of casualties. And that was what was going to happen to us. But we had a wonderful commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Arun Harolekar, who was made of sterner stuff. And he spoke to the officers in JSU and he said, we have been told that we will be reinforced within 48 hours, but I doubt that will happen. Rather than taking food, we will take more ammunition, we will take more grenades. Is that okay with you? So the JSU officer said, sir, that's fine. So we didn't take our second batch of clothing. We had no blankets. It was winter. We had no food. We had no water. We were eating grain scrabbled from the floor of huts which was in that area. We were drinking water from muddy ponds where buffaloes and all were. It was dirty water. But we survived. And we fought for 9 days and 9 nights without adequate food, without adequate water, with diminished ammunition. Sorry, I was the second in command. And when the CEO and I were going around, we saw the Gurkha Johnnies. We called them Johnnies. The Gurkha Johnnies were sharpening their cooking. We said, what are you doing? Saab, ammunition khatam bhayo. There's no ammunition left. Now we'll use our trusted cookery and we are quite happy. That's the way the Gurkha soldier is made. He was not bothered about there's no ammunition, there was no food, there was no water. They were dying because there was no medical treatment, because enemy artillery had blown up the regimental aid post. Everyone who was inside it had died. But there was no complaint. They never complain. They are with you. They understand the problems. They will fight to the last. Now what happened was, we were lucky that the British Broadcasting Corporation, you know what the Indian Army did? The government of India did a wonderful thing. It said, we have nothing to hide. Let the foreign correspondents march with the troops. Let them see whatever they want to see. Let them report whatever they want to report, because we have nothing to hide. And so they were reporting, they were sleeping alongside our men, they were eating our food, and they have reported that the Indian Army soldier is the most perfect gentleman. Despite the atrocities by the Pakistanis, they have behaved in a very mature and ethical. So that was a good thing which happened. But one of the foreign correspondents, he probably couldn't understand the difference between a battalion and a brigade. And instead of saying a Gurkha battalion landed at Sylhet, he said a battalion of Gurkha, a brigade of Gurkhas was landed at Sylhet. Now we knew the Pakis were listening, we were listening, so we said, let's pretend to be a brigade. So we put the troops aside and we tried to fool the Pakistanis that we were in fact a brigade. And finally, on the 15th of December, two young officers from Pakistani officers came with white flags wanting to surrender. Now the CO was a little worried that if the Pakis come to know how thin we are on the ground, they might change their mind. So he said, tell them to go back. I've got no orders to accept their surrender. We'll keep fighting on. So they said, no, can we talk to the brigade commander? Then we realized that we have managed to bluff them that we are a brigade. We said, no, you come tomorrow at the same time in the same place after I get orders to accept your surrender. This is the brigade commander's orders. And then we told the brigade commander, for goodness sake, please come and take the surrender tomorrow. So he came in a chopper and they said, Are, who has come in this chopper? The brigade commander said, I have come in this chopper. He said, are you not here? He said, no. And where are you? I'm 100 kilometers away. Then who is here? The brigade commander said, it is only one Gurkha battalion, and that too, half a Gurkha battalion. By this time, we were just 352. So they got the shock of their lives. They couldn't believe what they were being told. And we got the shock of our lives when 3 brigadiers, 2 full colonels, 173 officers, 290 JSOs, and 8,000 troops surrendered to us. As I was saying, we were just 352.
That's really. I remember when you wrote about this, it really had a tremendous impact. And when you look back at the war, it finished in 13 days. What was, from the ground and from what you know, what was the reason why we were able to finish this campaign in 13 days?
A good question, and I think we need to know a little more about this. At that time, the synergy between the government of India and the armed forces was perfect. We had a very strong chief, Sam Manekshaw. We had a very strong Prime Minister, Indira Gandhi. Sam Manekshaw told the Prime Minister, Madam Prime Minister, you asked me to walk into Bangladesh in April. And he gave a number of reasons. I don't know how much time it will take to tell you the whole story, but he just said it's not possible. And he gave the reasons. And we had a Prime Minister who listened. And he said, okay, what do you need? He told the Prime Minister, the Chief told the Prime Minister what we needed. And she supported us, made the ministries fall into line, made the bureaucrats fall into line. And we got what we wanted. He wanted his own time and place of choosing to launch the attack, to launch our offensive or counteract the Pakistanis. And that's how it worked. There was absolute cooperation between the Army, Navy and Air Force. Not perfect, because when the Indian Navy went to Karachi, there was no air cover. But otherwise, the joint operations were of a very, very high order. The Indian Air Force managed to destroy the Pakistani Air Force in East Pakistan. So all ground operations were possible. River crossing operations, amphibious operations, para-dropping operations, landings, heliborne landings, everything was possible thanks to the Air Force. So these were some of the reasons which allowed us to win this great victory. And of course, the Indian Army was very ethical, and we had a Pakistani army who had butchered a million East Pakistanis, raped women, children, and so they were an army which was unethical, brutal, and such an army can't fight because they have no respect for the officers because the officers were leading them in this nonsense. So we had an enemy which was not motivated, and of course, I must not forget, it was the Mukti Bahini, which take guerrilla operations, did a fantastic job in demoralizing the Pakistani army by destroying their bridges, cutting the lines of communication, assassinating leaders. So the Mukti Bahini, and last but not the least, the whole population of East Pakistan was supporting India. And if you have a whole population supporting you, then victory came very quick, very easy in 13 days.
Thank you, General. Uh, mm, you have recently published a second book of stories called Beyond Fear. There are 13 stories, and there are two things that struck me. You have made women the protagonists of 4 of those stories, and in 2 of those stories, you have focused on God. Would you like to share why you have done these 2 things?
Yeah. Firstly, I think, I don't know about other countries, but in India, we don't give enough credit to our women. The Indian soldier does what he is because he has the total and complete support of his wife, who tells him, don't worry about us, do your job, keep country first. If you read my first book, Veer, which has gone into 14 editions, it is the mothers who have influenced the children about country, the need to put country first, with stories about soldiers and others who have done so much to get independence for India. So it is mothers who influenced the children to join the army and do a great job. It is the wives who have said, don't worry about us, do what you have to do. We will look after ourselves. So I think mothers, wives, and women need to be given their due and credit, which I'm afraid I felt that it was not enough. And so I've written 4 stories. One is about a mother who had only 2 sons, and one was killed in Sri Lanka. And then she tells the battalion, the link between my battalion and the army, the regiment, must not break. Take this boy with you. So here is a mother who's going to be alone. Her husband has died. Here's her son, eldest son has also died. The only lone support is her second son, and she tells the battalion, you take him also. I'll be all right. So this is the dedication and commitment of the women of the Indian Army, mothers and wives and daughters, grandmothers. And the first story of this book is about RMO, a regimental medical officer, who was a woman, and the battalion was in Jammu, 3rd Battalion, the 5th Gurkhas, which was supposed to move into the valley for combat operations. And the hierarchy said, you can't go. So the brigade commander said, you can't go. The div commander said, you can't go. The corps commander said, you can't go. And I was colonel of the regiment, and I visited, and I said, you want to go? She said, yes. I said, you'll go. And she said, look at this man, he doesn't understand anything. The div commander, corps commander, brigade commander said no, and he said, you can go. So I went and met all of them, and to cut a long story short, I managed to persuade them to let her go. And she went and she made history, not only by being the first woman medical officer of an all-male battalion, but also because she won a gallantry award under fire and is the first woman in uniform to be given the Sena Medal for gallantry. So this story and the other stories, and then there's about God. Now, I do believe that the Indian Army is a very, Indians as a whole are very spiritual people. I'm not talking about religion, I'm talking about being spiritual, because we respect all religions and we believe in a God who's always there to support us. And when everything else fails, God is always there. And there are 2 stories about how this happens in war and in peace. And then the other stories, I think I spoke at Nagpur in the heart of RSS land about these stories, and they were very supportive, because courage is what is required, belief in oneself is required, self-respect is what is required, understanding that There's nothing that you can't do if you want to do it hard enough. And this is what the story is all about. And it also has lessons for the corporate sector. It has lessons for each and every individual, whether he's in uniform, out of uniform, about leadership, about management, about doing what is right, irrespective of the consequences. And I hope some of you at least will read this book.
Thank you, General. So we've come to the end of our discussion on your 4 books. But before I let you go and I open the floor for any questions, I'd like to ask you a question myself, and that is about what you've been speaking about, the values and the institution, the values that make the institution of the Indian Army. Would you like to pinpoint what, in your experience, you feel are the values that not only have sustained our institution of the Indian Army, but will enable this institution to transition into this period that is ahead of us as we...
Yeah, please come in. Please come in. Thank you. Yeah, I will. The Indian Army is a microcosm or representation of India as a whole. Its history, its culture, its traditions are what has shaped us, shaped our attitude, shaped our culture, shaped on how we need to do our duty in peace and in war. Courage, honor, sacrifice, self-sacrifice, commitment, dedication, self-respect, these are the values which have made us what we are. And these values have shaped our regimental traditions. It is regimental traditions which I believe is a cause of success in all operations that we have faced and won in missions impossible. So it is this which has shaped the Indian Army all these years. And I believe that we need to nurture regimental spirit because that is what it makes people work. Now, what is regimental spirit all about? It is the officer-man relationship. Leadership in battle is a privilege given to very few. It's an awesome responsibility which falls on young shoulders, the shoulders of young army officers who lead from the front. They don't say, you go ahead, I'm coming. They say, follow me, mere piche move. And the Indian soldier, who is the best in the world, follows his young officer because he knows that the officer is right in front, facing the brunt of enemy fire, and there's no coming back. And when that officer gets killed, the JCO takes over. If the JCO gets killed, the NCO takes over. So one after the other, but the task is always accomplished. And the ratio of casualties of officers to men is very, very high in the Indian Army. As I mentioned earlier, we started the war with 18 officers, my battalion, the 4th Battalion, the 5th Gurkhas, and we ended the war with just 7. Because by that time, 1 more officer had been killed. So 4 officers killed, 7 officers wounded, only 7 survived. So it is leadership, it is training. We train very, very hard. And we train hard for a large number of years. What is the Indian Army doing today? Besides those who are fighting on the borders in Ladakh and in the Northeast, etc., and in J&K, the rest of the army is training. And we train very hard. That training must not be interfered with. In 1957 or so, we had a problem. How much time do we have left? 10 minutes. Okay, so I'll come to that later. So the question is, therefore, that it is these customs and traditions which have shaped the Indian Army and our attitude to battle. And the Indian Army is a composite of every class, every creed, every state of India. It is the amalgam of what India is all about. If you look at what happened in 1971, We had an army chief, General Sam Manekshaw, who was a Parsi. We had an Eastern Army commander, General Aurora, Jagjit Singh Aurora, who was a Sikh. The person who formalized and evolved the strategy in East Pakistan was a Baghdadi Jew. The director of military operations in Delhi, depending upon how you look at it, because his mother was British, his father was a Sikh, so he became an Anglo-Indian, or he was Sikh. Out of the 9 div commanders who spearheaded all operations in East Pakistan, 3 were Christians. So there's no question of any type of difference in the Indian Army. We have in mixed regiments a dharamstal where Gurudwara, Girjagar, Masjid, Mandir are all together. In one particular case, in a mixed composition battalion which had a Maulvi and a Panditji, the Panditji's father had died. So he had to go at the time of Janamastami. Who conducted the rituals? It is the Maulvi who did it. So there is no difference in the Indian Army whatsoever. What happens when we retire and come out of the army? We find a different picture altogether. That must not happen. Please don't interfere with us. Let us do our job because we put country first. We are dispensable, but the honor of India is not. So have I answered it?
Thank you. I think you have now put a lot of ideas in our audience, and we have, as I said, 10 minutes. So if there are people in the audience who'd like to ask General Cardozo anything, please raise your hand, identify yourself, and ask the question as loudly as you can.
Just a question, a short question, not a comment. Okay. Right.
Follow Dhaka. Sir, during that time, what was the environment like in the Dhaka? And sir, in fact, I have heard that you were, when your leg got injured, you were operated by a Pakistani Major General officer. So, sir, can you please share a glimpse of that story?
Okay, there are 2 different questions. The question is, when Dhaka fell, what was the situation in Dhaka? At that time, there were 30,000 Pakistanis defending Dhaka. General Niazi was the commander-in-chief of all forces in East Pakistan. He was determined to ensure that there was no surrender, that there was a ceasefire. Now, the Indian strategy was that the Americans were going to interfere. We were not sure about what the Chinese would do. Nobody was in favor of India. So we were alone. And therefore, we decided that we need to wrap up this war as fast as possible. So the strategy was, do not blunt your operations head on against enemy positions, bypass them, head for the center, head for Dhaka. And we realized, General Jacob of Chief of Staff East Pakistan, he said, Dhaka must fall. And he was very right. Why? Because in the process of bypassing enemy positions, there were islands of Pakistanis all over in East Pakistan. And if we agreed to a ceasefire, there would be a liberated country with pieces of Pakistan all over the place. So we had to ensure that it was a surrender and not a ceasefire. And again, General Jacob was tasked by Sam Manekshaw, here is the instrument of surrender, take it and make Niazi sign it. So he landed in a helicopter in Dhaka with just the surrender document and a stick. And there were these 30,000 troops. There was the Mukti Bahini baying for the blood of the Pakistanis. And it was a total confusion in Dhaka. But he managed to prevail on Niazi. You have to surrender. Niazi said, I'm not going to surrender. He said, you damn well have to surrender. And he was not prepared to surrender. Finally, Jacob told him, if you don't surrender, I am not responsible for your safety, because the Pakistani soldiers knew, because of the atrocities that they committed, if the Indian army stood back, they would have been massacred by the citizens of Bangladesh and the Mukti Bahini. So he said, you don't surrender, I'm not responsible for your safety. And Niazi capitulated and surrendered. That's how Jacob ensured the surrender, only armed with a document and a stick. That's what happened in Dhaka. As far as my case is concerned, I had stepped on a mine after the surrender had taken place. It was something which should not have happened, because in every country of the world, the convention is that when you lay a minefield, you have to mark the boundaries with a barbed wire and a cautionary there, caution, mines. That was not done. And I walked into this enemy minefield and stepped on a mine and my leg blew off. It was in a bad state, but that was it happens, and boy, one had to accept it. And I fell down, and it was a Mukti Bahini person who jumped into the minefield, lifted me up, and brought me to safety. And the rest is another story. But I was telling you earlier that the regimental aid post, the RAP, the medical facilities of the battalion had been destroyed by Pakistani artillery. We had no medicines, we had no instruments, we had nothing. So my commanding officer said surrender had taken place, and the Pakistanis heard about what had happened, and they said they had a hospital there, and they offered to operate on me. And a major Muhammad Bashir, a doctor, operated on me, and I'm afraid I've never been able to say thank you to him. I hope through my book he will realize that I'm grateful.
Thank you, General. Yes, please.
Good afternoon, Major General. It's a pleasure to meet you. You were the first cadet, and if I'm not wrong, the only cadet to have won a gold medal and a silver medal in NDA. You were one of the first batches of cadets to have passed, then the Joint Secretary Wing, and now NDA. I want to know what was your experience like being a cadet, a National Defense cadet, that too an honored cadet, one of the most honored cadets of the country. So I want to know what it was like, what your training was like in NDA, because half of us are pursuing or want to get into National Defense Academy one day. So that would be I would be very grateful if you could share your experience in NDA.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
General, you could add a bit about how you were also accompanying the legend of Stalingrad, Marshal Zhukov, as the cadet in NDA.
Yeah. Okay. So, thank you, ma'am. Actually, it's a very funny story, because I come from Bombay and my house was close to the main road, and my parents did not want me to learn how to cycle on that road. But I managed chupa-chupi se to cycle, but I did not know how to mount and dismount. So when I joined the NDA in 1954, I was given a cycle, because anyway, the NDA is a huge campus, and we have to riding school is at one end, the swimming pool is somewhere else, the PT field is somewhere else, the academic institutions are somewhere else. So everybody goes on cycle. So I was given a cycle, and I told the JSU that I don't know how to mount and dismount, so I'll come separately. And you are not allowed to cycle individually in the NDA, so one cadet was allowed to accompany me. But there was a very sharp slope. I couldn't turn. I went over the road, fell down about 12 feet. My cycle was destroyed. And I was the only spectacle in the NDA running from one place to another with all my kit on my back, my riding kit, my drill kit, my swimming kit, etc. I was always late everywhere. I was on punishment every night. I used to skip breakfast so as not to be late. In the evenings, since I was going to be punishment in the NDA is very tough. Cycles, bricks, and all sorts of things. So I lost about 17 kgs in 2 months. And I was the laughing stock of the NDA. And I was very worried because I had left college and now I was faced with this problem. What would happen? But then, luck, the novices boxing competition took place, and I said, this is the place where I can make a mark. I went for my opponents from the time the bell was struck, and I demolished all my opponents. Still, I was defeated in the final semi-finals. But my superiors and my cadets and my officers realized that this guy, there's something in him. I think he needs to be resuscitated. So I was given my cycle. I learned how to mount and dismount. But I was at the bottom of my course in my first term. But I was doing very well. I was a hockey blue. I was an excellent swimmer. I played hockey for the NDA, football for the NDA, for the squadron, all sports, extracurricular activities. So my DIVO, the div, what is called a platoon commander, he said, Ian, you're doing very well in everything, but you're very poor in history and maths. And if you don't brush up, I'll have to relegate you. Relegate means you drop 6 months. So I tried very hard, but it didn't work out. So second term I was on relegation for but I learned one thing. I learned it is the principle of war. And the principle of war is cooperation. So my DIVO said, see, you're very good in everything except Hindi and maths. And there are many cadets who don't understand Shakespeare and English literature and all the things that you're... So you teach them those subjects and they'll help you in Hindi and maths. And that's what happened. In the study period, they were helping me. And I found that maths and Hindi was not that difficult after all. And I managed to pass. In my 5th term, I was second in order of merit. And in my final term, I had a big problem. We had the hierarchy of the NDA is the commandant, the major general. The next is the DEPCOM, who is the brigadier or a naval captain. And the third is the colonel training, full colonel. Now there was an officer there who was in charge of training, who was a wonderful officer, a Sikh officer, who wanted to make us cadets the best officers in the world. And he gave us a very, very, very tough time. He didn't spare us. We as cadets, of course, could not appreciate what he was doing. We did not like him. The junior officers didn't like him. And I was ordered by this colonel. No, when he shared this with us, when I was appointment at that time, at the head table, that he was called for a battalion social function and he was imitated in front of all the officers and their wives. He was very, very humiliated and hurt. And he shared it with us. And I said, sir, as the Academy Cadet Captain, I will ensure you'll never be imitated. He said, now, Cardozo, don't make a commitment which you cannot honor. And I said, sir, I will honor my commitment, not realizing I would face a very difficult situation. Because this colonel, after the camp torn out, it's a very tough camp, and the passing out parade was about a week ahead of us, he ordered me to imitate this officer. And I had made a commitment that I will not have him imitated. Now my future rested in the hands of this colonel, because all the Army, Navy, Air Force subjects and military strategy, military history, all was in his hands. So I was faced, as a young cadet, I was faced with this very difficult situation to whether I was to look at my own interests or honor the commitment of a word of honor. And I told this colonel, as a cadet, although I was the Academy Cadet Captain, I told this officer, I'm sorry, sir, it can't be done. He was livid. He said, I'll break you, I'll relegate you, I'll withdraw you. You won't be able to pick the pieces again, etc., etc., etc. And I ran away from there with 2 officers chasing after me. This is insubordination. This is bad discipline. You will be punished. You'll be withdrawn. You'll do this, that. I didn't know what to do. But values start at home. Values, all of you who are parents, values start at home. Those values are built upon in school and then upon the institution where you work. And those values taught me that do what is right, irrespective of the consequences. And so I stuck to my word. An Air Force officer came at 3 o'clock and said, come for the rehearsal. I said, sir, I'm not going to do it. And then luck is there and God is always there. So at the end of the campfire, I saw that colonel talking to the commandant, and a cadet course mate of mine came and said, the commandant is sent for you. So I ran up to the commandant and he said, Cardozo, what is this I hear? You're afraid to imitate an officer? Don't you realize, don't you know that it's done in the army? So I said, why are you afraid? If you're afraid like this, what will you do in battle? So I came to attention and said, sir, if I have to be afraid of anybody, it's not Major Sandhu. Sorry, the name. It's not the major who has asked me not to. I said I will not imitate. It is this colonel who's standing in front of you, who's told me that he will break me, he will withdraw me from the academy. And the commandant said to him, he said, his name was Dennis Key. He said, Dennis, is that right? Don't you know that I'm the head of the Board of Relegation and Withdrawal? Since when have you become the head of relegation and withdrawal? So he said, is Cardozo right in what he's saying? The colonel kept quiet. And the general, Habibullah, told me, he said, okay, run along now, do what you have to do. Now, if that colonel had taken action against me, I wouldn't have commanded the parade and I would have been demolished. And on the final day of the rehearsal, we had a regimental sergeant major from the Grenadier Guards, Regimental Sergeant Major Ailing. And after the first rehearsal, he said, Ian Cardozo, fall out. Come to the quarterdeck. So I came back to the quarterdeck. I said, okay, finished. I won't command the parade. And the Academy cadet captain normally is in the run for one of the medals. Normally. So I said, and then in the rehearsal, a battalion cadet captain was called and given 2 medals. So I said, there goes my medal. But what happened? I did command the parade. And as you rightly said, ma'am, I'm the first cadet in the history of the NDA to get both the medals. And subsequently, an order was passed. Nobody will get more than 1 medal.
Thank you so much.
That's the story, ma'am.
Thank you for the question, ma'am. Thank you so much, sir. We could go on and on listening to those incredible stories, but now we're short on time and moving on to our next panel. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Please give them a big round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being...
So you are a great storyteller.
Yeah. But as the person who asked the first question, how much is a story and how much is truth, was the first casualty of truth. So anyway,
it's all truth, we know.
Unfortunately, he's left. So I think I was too forthright in what I said about...
Requesting my team to present the mementos. And sir, if we can stand for a picture. Thank you.
Thank you for being a very appreciative and patient audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.